Evening, everyone. Hope you're all having a great weekend so far. I am now because a little bit earlier today I got to go check out Renfield, the new horror comedy from Chris McKay, the director of the Lego Batman movie and The Tomorrow War, of course. And it's written by Ryan Ridley, going off of a story by Robert Kirkman, the comic writer famous for The Walking Dead, of course, and many, many others. And it stars Nicholas Hoult, Aquafina, and of course, Mr. Nicolas Cage himself as Count Dracula. I was excited when I saw the trailer for this movie, but in kind of a cheap thrill sort of way, if you know what I mean. I wasn't necessarily expecting big things from it, but the novelty and fun of seeing Nicolas Cage play the Count, was enough to make me want to at least give it a shot. I thought it would sort of maybe fall into a guilty pleasure category, like it would sort of be a throwaway, sort of like one joke premise, and that would kind of be all there was to it. Of course, because it's Nicolas Cage, it would at least still be entertaining. But again, I went into this with relatively low expectations, although, certainly no ill will or mean spirits. And I was very pleasantly surprised and delighted to discover that this movie, in its own earnest way, actually kind of kicks a lot of ass. I mean, it's not going to change your life, but I'll be damned if this isn't the most fun I have had in a theater so far all year. And granted, this is only partway through April, but there really isn't much of a thing about this movie that I didn't like. Well, there's a couple little nitpicks that I have, but they are just nitpicks, and they're pretty minimal. I will bring them up, but, that can wait. But I used the word earnest earlier quite deliberately because among the many things that I really appreciated about this movie, I liked that it didn't feel the need to kind of just like frame it as yet another origin story for Dracula or for Renfield for that matter, because this is still ultimately Renfield's story. But it was nice that they essentially assume that you're vaguely familiar with these characters and they just proceed. I really wish more movies would do it that way these days. Like, I have no problem with properties being recycled. It's not always the most inspired thing, but at this point, we're not going to escape it. It's just kind of, a going trend. But that doesn't mean that every time you have to start from scratch, like you're writing the Bible over or something and try and, get bogged down in all this gratuitous, pretentious world building. Like, at this point, if you want to do a movie with, like, say, Superman, Batman, hell, I don't know, the Terminator for that matter, like, don't worry so much about trying to sort of, like, broaden the scope of everything. Just tell us a story. Assume that we all know and appreciate these characters and just give us an adventure with them. What is wrong with that? Nothing. To be fair, technically, this movie is a sequel to the 1931 Bela Lugosi Dracula movie, but it's not relying on that, and in fact, it opens up the movie by paying homage to that one in a very sort of elegant and classy way with some retro-looking 30s Hollywood footage that they put together. Some of it is archival for sure, but there's lots of it that obviously had to be shot for this movie. And while Nicolas Cage is still not like the spitting image of Bela Lugosi by any stretch, nor are they really striving to make him, a carbon copy of Bela Lugosi, but the makeup artists really deserve some credit because in those early sequences, he resembles Lugosi a lot more closely than I would have expected. But while still feeling like a character and allowing us to still sort of see Nicolas Cage as the actor behind all that makeup. This isn't one of those situations where the actor's performance is smothered behind a lot of really gratuitous and ill-conceived prosthetics. Choosing to focus on a longer relationship between Renfield and Dracula is enough to make this feel very fresh. That little bit of connective tissue to the 31 movie is not something that undermines that original movie in any way or taints its legacy, because it's a sequel that is actually continuing the story and not just rehashing that 31 movie. And it's actually acknowledging that 90 years have passed. Like, They very quickly and simply take care of a lot of issues there by just having this essentially be taking place in the now, our now, some, 90 years down the road from when these events transpire. Having it be a sequel that feels like it has essentially at this point been released in real time to coincide with how long Renfield and Dracula have known each other. That's what allows this movie to fashion an identity that stylistically and tonally feels so different from the 31 film, while still enabling it to be very seamlessly and simply connected to that earlier film. They throw in a plot point where you find out that when Dracula had a close call more recently with some vampire hunters and was essentially mangled almost beyond recognition, he's been regenerating and reforming, and hence that's why now he looks a little more like Nick Cage and less like Bela Lugosi. Not the first time that there's been sort of a facial reconstruction plot point in there to explain why a face changes or something like that, but it still works just fine. I mean, there's never a point where any part of it feels out of place. So yeah, it has a story that was actually constructed with some care, and it doesn't beat you over the head with its homage and its reverence for the earlier movie or for Dracula in general. That's all very cool. But then on top of that, the third major surprise and delight that I had with this movie was how just sheer balls out, wall to wall gory it was. Again, much like I mentioned with my Tokyo Gore Police review, it's all done for very cartoonish, comedic effect most of the time. First 5 minutes alone, you see Dracula rip someone's throat out, dive inside someone as a specter, make their body explode from the inside out, and maul someone while he's on fire and make them burn to death. It just gets nuttier from there, honestly. And I also really appreciate the fact that it's not just that these scenes are excessive, but they're very well choreographed. Like the fight choreography and the action choreography in this movie was way better than I expected. This was kind of a nice surprise that way, the same way that Day Shift was, the Jamie Foxx vampire hunter movie that's on Netflix. Really good movie. For those of you who didn't check it out because maybe you thought it looked a little bit sort of milquetoast, I mean, that was kind of my initial take. Give it a shot. It's 1,000 times better than I would have ever expected it to be. And that's essentially how I feel about this one too. And same thing, it's right down to the choreography. I mean, this movie was obviously made on a budget, but they still took the time to give us, fight scenes that were made with some care. It's not being done, of course, in a handheld way, and it's not trying to mimic the John Wick style while everything is in camera. But it still is giving you choreography that feels fluid and inspired, and it all really does feel like it's just actually happening on the spot and they're winging it, even though of course it was quite the opposite. Every time something happens and you think to yourself that they can't possibly take this a step further, they'll add one more twist to that moment in the fight scene, whatever sort of bit of violence is transpiring. They'll just turn the screw one more quarter turn even in some unexpected way that will just have you giggling, laughing, and applauding in the theater. One action scene in particular late in the film comes up with at least 3 things that I didn't know that you could do with a severed arm in a horror movie. And all the while, everything is peppered with just big, huge, like gusher-style clouds of exploding, billowing blood just gooshing out and flooding, splashing, splattering everywhere. Now, granted, if I had my way, I would have liked to have seen more of the gore and blood effects be practical rather than CGI. But again, minor nitpick. Plus, the more I think about it, in some ways, that might be a more germane approach in terms of keeping the tone and feel of this movie consistent. I also like that while Nicolas Cage does obviously provide a fair bit of comic relief as Dracula, the character still isn't like a complete spoof or made the butt of every single joke. It still feels like a fully rounded character. Again, it's not just Nicolas Cage in wind-up toy mode with fangs. He's giving a very sincere and committed performance here. I mean, he honestly did bring his A game to this one, and he probably didn't have to put butts in the seats or even to make people he was working with on this one happy, for all I know. But he really brought it, man. especially because I think that making him too much of a sucker for pratfalls or making him sort of more of a bumbling vampire or even a more sort of blandly written one would have undermined a lot of the credibility, if you can call it that, in the fight scenes. But, because he actually feels like a character with genuine emotions, feelings, and characteristics, you buy that he's not someone that you would want to cross lightly, even if he is a bit on the kooky side. Because the movie doesn't ever really judge Dracula or Renfield in any way, not only do you believe that both of these guys are people that you wouldn't want to call to the mat and tangle with, but there's moments when they're fighting other people and each other where honestly you're not sure who you want to win. It makes sense. You would have to be able to empathize with both of these characters in various ways in order to appreciate and analyze the codependency that exists between them that the movie is more sort of centrally concerned with. No points for surmising that there's a codependency between these two characters. That is kind of the whole point and the whole angle that Dracula always wanted when he recruited Renfield, even in the original story. It's mapped out in a way that never feels forced or heavy-handed or too topical for its own good. I never felt like the movie was lecturing me about that concept in any way. And in fact, it's kind of fun to toy with what they were thinking about when they made one of Dracula's big targets the codependency support group that Renfield eventually finds himself in. The movie does, I think, correctly suggest that by languishing and wallowing too long in self-pity and sort of self-victimization and meditation on what you've been through, you actually end up leaving yourself fairly vulnerable not only to other predators, but more deep-seated personal problems long-term that nevertheless no one will be able to dig you out of but you. And one of the nicer moments in the movies comes when Nicholas Hoult as Renfield expresses the revelation that despite how Dracula had things spun in their relationship, Renfield never really needed Dracula. Dracula needed him. From a practical standpoint, I think I see where Dracula is coming from, because sure, he could probably accomplish a lot of what he's putting Renfield on task for just as easily on his own, if not even more easily. But I mean, who wants to work that hard for all eternity, right? Anytime a movie can communicate a piece of clear, simple insight like that to me without making me feel like I'm being talked to like a little kid, that's the sign of good writing. In the same way that Chris McKay was obviously very good at creating a movie that works on different levels for kids and adults with the Lego Batman movie, he achieves a similar balancing act here by not so much giving you a movie that is appropriate for younger audiences, but within the spectrum of a horror audience, there's things here that will work on one level for someone who is maybe just there for the gravy, for the gore and for the sensational elements and the thrills. And then there's also elements there that will work for people who are there for maybe things that are a little more highbrow, like little winks and nudges to other elements of the Dracula lore and the comedy and the satire about modern America. Now, obviously, I could go on forever about Nicolas Cage if I really, really wanted to. But I also want to acknowledge that Nicholas Hoult does a very, very good job of being his foil. I mean, Nicholas Hoult is one of those guys where I feel like I don't have too much to say about him, but it's not because he's a bad actor. It's because he's honestly just usually so good that I tend to kind of forget that he's even acting. Like, no matter what he's in, I take him as that character, and this is no different. So keep it up, man. You are a grossly consistent performer. Because he has to oscillate between being courageous and tough in the action scenes, while elsewhere in the movie having to appear very troubled and emotionally fragile and, occasionally a little bit sort of like, dumb and ignorant and dickish. It's a sort of part that could end up feeling inconsistent with a less talented actor. Awkwafina as the cop he teams up with is also very good here. I understand that she's a hip-hop artist, although I will confess I have never heard of any of her stuff. This, as far as I know, is my introduction to her, And on the basis of this, I'd say that, she probably has a pretty decent future as a supporting actress. I don't know if she would ever be up to carrying a whole movie. Who knows? Her career as an actress, I think, is still pretty fresh at this point. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But I sense that she's relatively new to the game, but I think that she could be a very dependable supporting performer in the right roles, and she fits this role perfectly. She never tries too hard to be funny. She trusts the script. She projects this confidence and this sense of resilience that makes her work very well when things hit the fan and guns and other weapons are drawn in those action scenes. And then in a different way, that resilience of character shows up in the quieter moments in ways that do feel very sincere and human. The attraction between her and Nicholas Hoult feels very sweet and unforced. And it's also kind of nice that while she is obviously a very presentable and attractive woman, she doesn't feel impossibly attractive the way that a lot of actresses do. I don't want to sound like I am putting her down in any ways. I'm just saying that it feels very natural, organic, endearing. Yeah, Aquafina, if you're watching this, you looked great, and I'm sure you always look great. It's just I appreciate it that much more because you look genuinely great. You don't look like you've been under the knife. Well, save for some scenes in this movie, but that's a different story. The rest of the supporting cast is great across the board. They're all people who I recognize and enjoy, but it's kind of nice that none of them, aside from the two Nicks, are particularly prominent names for the most part. Actually, just to back up for a second, I'm sorry, but I just had a thought. Do you think that they cast two guys with the same first name as the two characters who have formed a codependency on purpose, or was that just a coincidence? I don't know. I, I mean, yeah, come on. It had to have been on purpose, right? I guess that sucks for anyone who read for these roles who wasn't named Nick, but oh well. Like somewhere out there in Hollywood right now, there's Matthew Broderick and Matthew McConaughey sitting down to have a conversation about how they got passed up for this, and they are both really pissed, right? Geez, that could almost like be a new game, coming up with different pairs of actors and actresses that could have fun playing codependency on screen who happen to share the same first name. Actually, you know what? Strike that. That's a terrible idea. Let's not do that. I don't know if anyone watching this video would actually want to follow my lead anyways, but on the off chance that you are accepting me as an influencer at this point, don't. Ignore it. Terrible idea. But anyway, getting back to the supporting cast, the one other person that I did want to mention before the end of the video was an actor named Brandon Scott Jones. He plays Mark. He's the group leader of the codependency support group that Renfield is going to. And I'm not sure if I've seen this guy somewhere before or not, but I'll be damned if he doesn't steal more than one of the scenes that he's in. And a lot of it isn't even to do with the dialogue, although he does get some good one-liners. But a lot of the times, just his reactions to what is transpiring in front of him were priceless. Like, it's the kind of stuff that you cannot buy. You can't teach it in acting school. And I think the fact that he has some experience as a comedian might have something to do with it. At least that's what I read. But you can tell he's got a very natural sense of comic timing, and yeah, I hope to see him in more, and he was perfect here. The only other nitpick that I'll mention that I sort of alluded to near the start of the video involves something in the plot that I will not, spoil. I'll keep, my thoughts vague here just for your sake. But let's just say for now that there's one character who, in my opinion, is strongly hinted to have a hidden true nature throughout the movie. From the character's surname on down, there was really only one way that I kind of saw this going. And I didn't get impatient looking for it to happen or waiting for it to happen because the movie was so entertaining and briskly paced. But by the end of the movie, what I was almost certain would transpire didn't. And I'm not sure if that's perhaps because they're saving that for a sequel or another spin-off or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. But it just ends up maybe feeling like a bit of a red herring. I mean, for all I know, we could end up getting a sequel to this. Small movies like this, that doesn't usually happen, especially not in this day and age. Like, this is one of the few movies, in fact, that I can think of, though, even though it is, I guess, technically what you could call one of those legacy sequels. I don't feel like the whole sort of like MO here was to try and, like, revitalize the Dracula franchise or something like that. Like, I think that this just frankly wants to be a one and done. However, I just had so much fun with this one that if they did make another sequel that continued along this timeline, I would be totally fine with that. In fact, I think I probably would enjoy it. Again, does it desperately need a sequel? In my opinion, it doesn't. But I can't honestly say that by the end of it, I felt like I had enough of these characters or I was over them. Like, I would probably enjoy spending more time with them. And the more I think about it, it's hard for me to not wonder if, plans for a sequel were part of the reason that they didn't try to sort of escalate the relationship between Rebecca and Renfield a little bit more sort of hastily. But even if that was the case, I guess I'm grateful for, like, fate's intervention there, because having it be a little bit more understated like this works way better. Now, I know that when I start going on some of my analytical rants and ambles and tangents, it can kind of make a movie feel a bit more serious by implication than it actually is. So one of the last things I'm going to leave you all with is, like, just let me tell you that as a horror comedy, this got more laughs out of me than any other movie I have seen in this category all year. It's just a ton of fun. That's all there is to it. And as much as I can appreciate the gripe that some people have that vampires are never made to be truly scary anymore, in addition to getting more scary vampires, though, why can't we get a few more funny ones like this? Let's start making them funnier. We don't need them to be romantic anymore, of course not. I mean, Twilight killed that. But let's not be afraid to give the genre a little bit of a kick in the pants here and there too. And the fact that it's all friendly ribbing here still makes it feel very classy. Like, this is, in some respects, yes, kind of having fun with and poking fun at the Dracula lore, but it's affectionate ribbing. It's affectionate the same way that the comedy that sends up James Bond in Austin Powers is affectionate. You can tell that it's all been fashioned by someone who has a very deep and sincere love of his source material. At this point, it would be so easy to fall back on all the tropes that come with bringing an old character into the modern world. But this movie has the confidence to avoid all of that, and I am so grateful. It's funny, it's witty, but it is never snarky. This is the second year in a row then where one of the most infectious pieces of entertainment that I saw all year was a Nicolas Cage movie. We are still getting some of those low-grade phoning it in action movies from him here and there. I don't think that's ever going to change at this point. But it's nice to see that he's starting to sometimes, take movies that still fall into the B movie category, but infusing them with a lot more effort and commitment as an actor. He's having fun, but he is doing his job and doing it damn well. I know it's getting mixed reviews, but in my opinion, this is top-rate entertainment. There's really, again, aside from the couple things I mentioned, not a thing about it I would change. The pace is perfect. It's not too long. It's not too short. Every character is cast just about perfectly, and my cheerful mood did not let up from the beginning of the movie to the end. This one is definitely getting added to the collection, and while I know I say a lot of things, I'm seriously considering doing sort of a side-by-side analysis between this movie and the 31 Dracula, just to see how much connective tissue is really there. Because I feel like this is a movie that when you rewatch, you'll have a lot of fun picking out all the little Easter eggs that they wove into the script for you. Check this one out, guys. I'm just going to say that one more time. check this one out. It is a blast. So thanks for watching, guys. If any of you have seen Renfield and you want to leave some comments, I would love to hear your opinions. Look for more content before the end of the weekend, probably, and I will catch you all again real soon. Happy Saturday.